It's interesting because there seems to be like sort of multiple ramifications for this, and I know that you read a lot of the same people that I read, and there's a lot of people who just have no idea what's going to happen. But it definitely feels to me like what's going on is, in part, obviously, anti-immigrant, and, we're reading this from afar, but also a function of like the way, I mean, I just remember reading coming out of 2008, all of the horrible austerity stories coming out of Great Britain. Really, I mean, up until, very recently. And it seems like to a certain extent, that has caught up with the country, and they may have been laying the blame in the wrong place, or maybe not, but it's a little bit scary to me because it seems more where the real long-term implications could be in the rest of Europe, in terms of whether or not the EU actually sort of survives as an entity going forward 5-10 years down the road.
Well, yeah. I mean, first, let me just say up front that I am anything but an expert on this particular topic, but I read, what everybody else reads about this, I assume. And I have to agree, just in general, that what I think we're seeing, and we're seeing it here as well to a lesser extent than we are in Europe, which was hit, with much more substantial austerity programs than we were hit with in the U.S. We happen to have, a Democrat in the White House who, at least mitigated the harm of austerity in a way that in Europe they just went for it. And it is not surprising that is going to create a reaction. And the thing that strikes me about it, and I think we talked about this once before, which is that, these things tend to have a bit of a delayed reaction. People are in, you're sort of paralyzed when you're in the middle of something like this. I mean, we know what it's like to be in a deep recession. And, I remember my grandparents talking about the Great Depression, where there's just a sense of I just need to get from day to day here. I can't really think about the bigger picture. But once it starts to be relieved, the pressure's taken off just a little, you start to go, wait a minute, what the hell just happened here? And I think that that's just sort of a mass reaction to what went on. And it's not surprising to me at all in Europe. I mean, we look what happened in Greece. I mean, it was a similar kind of problem. And certainly the people, when it was put to a referendum, they didn't vote for Brexit, but they did vote, against all these austerity programs. And, this I think you're right that this portends something fairly ominous for the European Union project, and a lot of that is to do with their own kind of willingness to, stick it to the people and say, to do this kind of take your medicine sort of policy, which many people, including you and me, we were watching it going, what are these people thinking? You can't do that. You can't just sit there and say, well, everybody's going to have to suffer in order to, bring right things. That's just the way it has to be. I mean, you would think Europe, of all places, would understand that there are severe ramifications to those kinds of policies. They did it before, as we all remember, after World War I, and it didn't work out really well. So, I have to assume that, obviously this is not exactly that kind of situation, but it's not dissimilar, really. And then you combine that with the crisis in the Middle East, the immigration influx, and, you have the scapegoat available, which apparently in Britain was taken up. I mean, I was watching this guy last night on the BBC, Nigel Farage, who was kind of led the Leave campaign. I mean, he is a piece of work, this guy.
Well, according to him, we just played an audio of him saying that he had been sort of squeezed out on the Leave campaign, which was his way of distancing himself from the promise that all this extra money was going to go to the NHS. But go ahead.
Right. That wasn't his doing, he says. But, he also gave, which I thought was funny, I put that up on my blog, actually, that clip, because I'm sitting there going, you're kidding. Right. Within minutes of the polls closing, this guy's saying, hey, we were only kidding. But nonetheless, the true thrust of the Leave campaign, at least towards the end, was evidently, I mean, it was a strong xenophobic anti-immigrant push. I mean, just hardcore. And that may be what turned the tide for it, because it was neck and neck. The polling, it's close.
Right.
And this this idea that here you have an economic crisis. You've got people sort of in an ongoing sense of, I don't want to use the word malaise, but it's close enough. But things just not going well, and a lot of this vote. By the way, I mean, London, where the cosmopolitan types are, they didn't vote. They voted to remain, but it was in the rest of the country, in Northern England, working class,
The
that
heartland,
voted to leave.
if you will.
The heartland, right? The heartland. They voted to leave, and so you had this economic stress that was inflicted on these people over a long period of time. I mean, it really was years, and that takes its toll. And then you had this immigration crisis with a perfect scapegoat, and
Right.
this is what you have, So, I mean, that's my simplistic version of what happened, but I don't really think that it's completely wrong. I think when you get right down to it, Occam's razor says that, it's economic hardship combined with xenophobia, and this is the kind of stuff that you get, and God only knows what. And they shot themselves in the foot as well, because I can't imagine that those working class folk in Britain are going to come out on top. I just have a feeling they're going to be big losers in whatever happens now as well. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that remains to be seen to a certain extent. I think there's it's quite possible maybe the sort of neoliberal conservative governance that has been sort of creeping. Aggressively creeping in. Maybe that's those aren't the right words, but into Britain will at least have to be owned a little bit more, right? I mean, you won't have this sort of fig leaf of the EU to argue that we need to institute these policies on some level. I don't know. I mean, I'm with you. I don't know enough about British politics, but I wonder also, just to sort of like, pivot across the Atlantic, as it were. Do you think, I mean, there seems to have been such surprise about this, and there was such assuredness, I think, on the part of the sort of the Remain and the elite that this was not going to happen. I wonder if it impacts our politics here. Like, if I am someone who, it seems like it really was a shocking surprise to, let's say, David Cameron. I mean, obviously completely out of touch, right? I mean, to have offered up this vote, thinking this is going to be a slam dunk, and now it's basically he just more or less installed Boris Johnson into his old job. Hello, you. I'm Sam Seder. Looking for smart progressive talk that is occasionally amusing? Well, subscribe to our YouTube feed. Subscribe to our podcast. Like us on Facebook. And just generally enjoy us.